The House of the Vampire, by George Sylvester Viereck. Chapter 23. Ernest conducted Ethel Brandenburg to his room and helped her to remove her cloak. While he was placing the garment upon the back of a chair, she slipped a little key into her handbag. He looked at her with a question in his eyes. "Yes," she replied, "I kept the key, but I had not dreamed that I would ever again cross this threshold." Meanwhile it had grown quite dark. The reflection of the street lanterns without dimly lit the room, and through the twilight fantastic shadows seemed to dance. The perfume of her hair pervaded the room and filled the boy's heart with romance. Tenderness long suppressed called with 1,000 voices. The hour, the strangeness and unexpectedness of her visit, perhaps even a boy's pardonable vanity, roused passion from its slumbers, and once again wrought in Ernest's soul the miracle of love. His arm encircled her neck, and his lips stammered blind, sweet, crazy, and caressing things. "Turn on the light," she pleaded. "You are not always so cruel." "No matter. I have not come to speak of love." "Why then have you come?" Ernest felt a little awkward, disappointed, as he uttered these words. What could have induced her to come to his rooms? He loosened his hold on her and did as she asked. How pale she looked in the light! How beautiful! Surely she had sorrowed for him, but why had she not answered his letter? Yes, why? "Your letter?" She smiled a little sadly. "Surely you did not expect me to answer that." "Why not?" He had again approached her, and his lips were close to hers. "Why not? I have yearned for you. I love you." His breath intoxicated her. It was like a subtle perfume. Still she did not yield. "You love me now. You did not love me then. The music of your words was cold, machine-made, strained, and superficial. I shall not answer, I told myself. In his heart he has forgotten you. I did not then realize that a dangerous force had possessed your life and crushed in your mind every image but its own." "I don't understand." "Do you think I would have come here if it were a mere light matter? No, I tell you it is a matter of life and death to you, at least as an artist." "What do you mean by that?" "Have you done a stroke of work since I last saw you?" "Yes. Let me see. Surely, magazine articles and a poem." "That is not what I want to know. Have you accomplished anything big? Have you grown since this summer? How about your novel?" I've almost finished it in my mind, but I have found no chance to begin with the actual writing. I was sick of late, very sick." No doubt of it. His face was pinched and pale, and the lines about the mouth were curiously contorted, like those of a man suffering from a painful internal disease. "Tell me," she ventured, "do you ever miss anything?" "Do you mean, are there thieves?" "Thieves? Against thieves one can protect oneself." He stared at her wildly, half frightened, in anticipation of some dreadful revelation. His dream! His dream! That hand! Could it be more than a dream? God! His lips quivered. Ethel observed his agitation, and continued more quietly, but with the same insistence. "Have you ever had ideas, plans that you began without having strength to complete them? Have you had glimpses of vocal visions that seemed to vanish no sooner than seen? Did it ever seem to you as if some mysterious and superior will brutally interfered with the workings of your brain?" Did it seem so to him? He himself could not have stated more plainly the experience of the last few months. Each word fell from her lips like the blow of a hammer. Shivering, he put his arm around her, seeking solace, not love. This time she did not repulse him, and trustingly, as a child confides to his mother, he depicted to her the suffering that harrowed his life and made it a hell. As she listened, indignation clouded her forehead, while rising tears of anger and of love weighed down her lashes. She could bear the pitiful sight no longer. "Child," she cried, "do you know who your tormentor is?" And like a flash the truth passed from her to him. A sudden intimation told him what her words had still concealed. "Don't! For Christ's sake, do not pronounce his name!" he sobbed. "Do not breathe it! I could not endure it! I should go mad!" Chapter 24. Very quietly, with difficulty restraining her own emotion so as not to excite him further, Ethel had related to Ernest the story of her remarkable interview with Reginald Clarke. In the long silence that ensued, the wings of his soul brushed against hers for the first time, and love by 1,000 tender chains of common suffering welded their beings into one. Caressingly the ivory of her fingers passed through the gold of his hair and over his brow, as if to banish the demon eyes that stared at him across the hideous spaces of the past. In a rush 1,000 incidents came back to him, mute witnesses of a damning truth. His play, the dreams that tormented him, his own inability to concentrate his mind upon his novel which hitherto he had ascribed to a nervous disease, all piling fact on fact, became one monstrous monument of Reginald Clarke's crime. At last Ernest understood the parting words of Abel Felton, and the look in Ethel's eye on the night when he had first linked his fate with the other man's. Walkom's experience too, and Reginald's remarks on the busts of Shakespeare and Balzac, unmistakably pointed toward the new and horrible spectre that Ethel's revelation had raised in place of his host. And then, again, the other Reginald appeared, crowned with the lyric wreath. From his lips golden cadences fell, sweeter than the smell of many flowers or the sound of a silver bell. He was once more the divine master, whose godlike features bore no trace of malice, and who had raised him to a place very near his heart. "No," he cried, "it is impossible. It's all a dream, a horrible nightmare." "But he has himself confessed it," she interjected. "Perhaps he has spoken in symbols. We all absorb to some extent other men's ideas, without robbing them and wrecking their thought-life. Reginald may be unscrupulous in the use of his power of impressing upon others the stamp of his master-mind. So was Shakespeare. No, no, no. You are mistaken. We were both deluded for the moment by his picturesque account of a common, not even a discreditable fact. He may himself have played with the idea, but surely he cannot have been serious." "And your own experience, and Abel Felton's and mine, can they too be dismissed with a shrug of the shoulder?" "But come to think of it, the whole theory seems absurd. It is unscientific. It is not even a case of mesmerism. If he had said that he hypnotized his victims, the matter would assume a totally different aspect. I admit that something is wrong somewhere, and that the home of Reginald Clarke is no healthful abode for me. But you must also remember that probably we are both unstrung to the point of hysteria." But to Ethel his words carried no conviction. "You are still under his spell," she cried anxiously. A little shaken in his confidence, Ernest resumed, "Reginald is utterly incapable of such an action, even granting that he possessed the terrible power of which you speak. A man of his splendid resources, a literary Midas at whose touch every word turns into gold, is under no necessity to prey on the thoughts of others. Circumstances, I admit, are suspicious, but in the light of common day this fanciful theory shrivels into nothing. Any court of law would reject our evidence as madness. It is too utterly fantastic, utterly alien to any human experience." "Is it, though?" Ethel replied with peculiar intonation. "Why, what do you mean?" "Surely," she answered, "you must know that in the legends of every nation we read of men and women who were called vampires. They are beings, not always wholly evil, whom every night some mysterious impulse leads to steal into unguarded bedchambers, to suck the blood of the sleepers, and then, having waxed strong on the life of their victims, cautiously to retreat. Thence comes it that their lips are very red. It is even said that they can find no rest in the grave, but return to their former haunts long after they are believed to be dead. Those whom they visit, however, pine away for no apparent reason. The physicians shake their wise heads and speak of consumption. But sometimes ancient chronicles assure us the people's suspicions were aroused, and under the leadership of good priests they went in solemn procession to the graves of the person suspected, and on opening the tombs it was found that their coffins had rotted away, and the flowers in their hair were black, but their bodies were white and whole. Through no empty sockets crept the vermin, and their sucking lips were still moist with a little blood." Ernest was carried away in spite of himself by her account, which vividly resembled his own experience. Still he would not give in. "All this is impressive. I admit it is very impressive. But you yourself speak of such stories as legends. They are unfounded upon any tangible fact, and you cannot expect a man schooled in modern sciences to admit, as having any possible bearing upon his life, the crude belief of the Middle Ages." "Why not?" she responded. "Our scientists have proved true the wildest theories of medieval scholars. The transmutation of metals seems today no longer an idle speculation, and radium has transformed into potential reality the dream of perpetual motion. The fundamental notions of mathematics are being undermined. One school of philosophers claims that the number of angles in a triangle is equal to more than two right angles, another propounds that it is less. Even great scientists who have studied the soul of nature are turning to spiritualism. The world is overcoming the shallow skepticism of the 19th century. Life has become once more wonderful and very mysterious. But it also seems that, with the miracles of the old days, their terrors, their nightmares, and their monsters have come back in a modern guise. Ernest became even more thoughtful. "Yes," he observed, "there is something in what you say." Then, pacing the room nervously, he exclaimed, "And still I find it impossible to believe your explanation. Reginald a vampire! It seems so ludicrous. If you had told me that such creatures exist somewhere far away, I might have discussed the matter. But in this great city, in the shadow of the Flatiron Building, no." She replied with warmth, "Yet they exist, have always existed, not only in the Middle Ages, but at all times and in all regions. There is no nation but has some record of them in one form or another. And don't you think, if we find a thought, no matter how absurd it may seem to us, that has ever occupied the minds of men, if we find, I say, such a perennially recurrent thought, are we not justified in assuming that it must have some basis in the actual experience of mankind?" Ernest's brow became very clouded, and infinite numbers of hidden premature wrinkles began to show. How wan he looked, and how frail! He was as one lost in a labyrinth in which he saw no light, convinced against his will, or rather against his scientific conviction, that she was not wholly mistaken. "Still," he observed triumphantly, "your vampires suck blood. But Reginald, if vampire he be, preys upon the soul. How can a man suck from another man's brain a thing as intangible, as quintessential as thought?" "Ah," she replied, "you forget. Thought is more real than blood." End of Section 12.